Hello, everyone, and welcome to Chapter 7 Listening, Receiving, and Responding. Previously, we've been discussing language, the verbal communication, nonverbal communication, another sending of a message, dealing with people who are different from us in intercultural communication. Now we're going to be spending an extra focus on listening. The reason why is vast. First, listening is uh, there we go. Listening is common. We are constantly listening, and in fact, leading to the very corny saying, we have two ears for listening and one mouth for speaking, so we should listen twice as much as we talk. But also, studies have shown that 55% of students' time is spent listening. That I think is too small. And listening is an important ingredient to relational satisfaction. Has anyone ever had a time when they did not feel listened to? How did it make you feel? Usually it makes us feel bad. And that can actually diminish relational satisfaction. Also, as we've talked about a little bit before, intercultural communication. One of the big challenges is that anxiety, feeling that I'm going to offend someone. Not a single person has ever been offended by someone listening too much to them. And by better listening, we are improving our understanding of others, and in persuasive speeches or in persuasive situations, by listening to opposing viewpoints, we will improve our ability to adapt to those viewpoints and persuade those viewpoints. So let's first define listening by what it is and by what it is not. So listening is the process of recognizing, understanding, interpreting, and responding to others' messages. It is the process of understanding and recognizing and interpreting and responding. There is more than just simply hearing, which is the vibrations of sound waves on the eardrums that fire electrochemical impulses that all of a sudden lead to the brain. So, hearing is not listening. There is a lot more to listening than just the sound hitting your ear. We also have to define the difference between mindless listening and mindful listening. Mindless listening is reacting to messages automatically and routinely without much mental investment, whereas mindful listening is giving careful and thoughtful attention and responses to the messages we receive. We tend to mindlessly listen when we take listening as something peripheral, something that we do along with other things. Things like, why listen to music as I drive, or as I run, or as I play video games? Or this can get worse, and this is those times it makes sense to mindlessly listen because you're focused on other things. But when it becomes challenging is when we communicate with others. When I am talking to you, I'm listening while I'm checking my phone. Or my significant others trying to have a relationship conversation as I'm trying to play video, as I'm also playing video games. That creates a lot of challenges, and mindful listening is obviously going to be more appropriate and effective in those given situations. Not just will I be better able to comprehend the information, but also by showing that I have received the message, that is very confirming of the value I hold in my relational partner, in the person that I'm listening to. So let's further understand what listening is with the listening styles. There are 4 key listening styles: task-oriented listening, relational, analytical, and critical. So we start with task-oriented listening, and this is focusing on efficiency, accomplishing a job. So this is focusing on, how do I do this thing? What should I do next? take out the trash. Okay, I'm listening for the task. Now I'm taking out the trash. Go check on the receipts. Got it. I'm going to check the receipts. So it's about accomplishing jobs and efficiency. This, when we listen from this task oriented style, it can alienate when it seems to ignore the feelings of others. Let's say that a friend is going through a very hard time and is trying to confide in you. If you're focusing on task oriented listening, that can really alienate them because you're focusing on, okay, how do I efficiently solve this problem? And in so doing, you're diminishing the feeling that the other person is having. Next, we have relational listening, which is building emotional closeness, and the aim is to understand how the other person feels. This is feeling with the other person. It's perspective taking the perspective of another person, and staying out of judgment. That empathetic relational listening really shows that you care about the other person and to understand how they feel. The big challenge with this, however, is that we may lose detachment from the situation. Because if we are trying to, let's say that this person is actually asking for our advice of how do I solve this challenge with my significant other, or a challenge with a teacher that for some reason I can't communicate with. That can end up that if I'm just trying to empathize, then I may not be able to take an objective view of the subject and try to find the way to solve this issue. Next, we have analytical listening. This is attending to the full messages before judging, and it's good at handling complex issues, but it is also time consuming. Analytical listening is what we hopefully do in classrooms, where we are trying to understand and soak up the information so that we are better able to understand this complex issue. In that last example, analytical listening might be better to try to provide analysis of that situation. Or if, let's say that your romantic partner is discussing all the issues that she or he is having mentally. Maybe they're feeling anxious. Maybe they're feeling depressed. Maybe they're feeling this, that, or the other. There becomes a choice. Do we engage in relational listening to show that you support them? Or after a while, is it better to then try to understand the complexity of how they are thinking? Obviously, that depends on the different types of relationships, but I would argue that relational listening may be better until someone asks for that sort of input. And lastly, we have critical listening. Critical listening is to evaluate messages. That we do not, instead of just taking in information, we are evaluating information as right or wrong, or good or bad, or fair or unfair, or whatever. This is good when investigating a problem, but may frustrate others by appearing to find fault in minor details. So let's say that your best friend is like, you know what, no matter what I do, I cannot get this job. I've tried my best, but for some reason they just keep on passing me over for this promotion. Relational listening might be the most called for, but if you were instead to focus on critical listening, well, you know what? I mean, you say that you work very hard, but I've also seen a few times where, that's not really happening. In fact, I've, seen you on Netflix quite often. So that is evaluating the message of his to try to find the small little things that are wrong with what he said. Are there times when that may be called for? 100%. But that can also really frustrate that person. So those are the four types of listening styles. Now we move on to some challenges. What are the challenges of listening? First, information overload. We are constantly bombarded by information. We are bombarded by work email, where we receive hundreds of emails a day. We are bombarded through our phones, through text, through social media, through um, through many different channels. And as a result, it's hard for us to focus on one particular message. That is one of the big benefits of mindful listening, to focus on the listening situation instead of just mindlessly listening, because then that allows us to do other things. Also, personal concerns. Personal concerns of more immediate importance, that there may be some concerns that are more important than the speaker's message. That instead of discussing, so in other words, um, that there may be something that I am dealing with. Maybe there's an issue going on, and as a result, it is causing me to be a little bit mindless. Maybe I'm distracted by it. A good example is that maybe a dog is barking out there, and as a result, maybe it might be hard for me to keep track of the thoughts or keep track of this communication situation. We also have rapid thought. We can understand about 600 words per minute very quickly, whereas people can speak only 100 to 140 words. So what do we do with that extra time? Well, we end up thinking about other things. Um, so we instead try to so we can end up getting very distracted. If the person is talking slowly, then you're just focusing on other things and lose attention. And then lastly, we have noise. Noise is physical or mental noise that can distort the message. A good example of this is maybe there's a dog barking right outside the door, and as a result, you can't hear me. Instead, you can only hear the dog. Or the mental noise is maybe I'm tired and it's hard for me to listen to the to listen. Maybe I'm tired. Maybe I'm bored. Maybe I'm hungry. All of which are those mental noise that can be a big challenge to listening. So, there are some legitimate challenges to listening, and that can cause a lot of our problems with listening. But the majority of the reasons why we have bad listening is because of our own poor listening habits, which I feel is a very positive thing, because if we are the problem in a lot of senses for our poor listening, that means that we can also be the solution. So let's dive right on into some poor listening habits. First, pseudo listening. Pseudo listening is pretending to pay attention. Uh-huh. Mm-hmm. Okay. Sure. By using those sorts of cues, it can pretend like you're listening, and it can be a polite gesture, but it still isn't listening, and that can be a challenge. We also have stage hogging, which is expressing your own ideas without inviting others to share. You may be very passionate about a particular topic, and as a result, you have a lot to say on that topic. Believe me, I know. I like to hear myself talk too. But with stage hogging, it can make it so that the other person does not feel like you want to understand them, because maybe you don't, but that there should be balance between each person talking. So when you end up understanding that maybe you're taking up the stage, asking the question, well, what do you think? That can allow for more effective listening. We also have selective listening, which is responding only to parts of a speaker's remarks that interest you. So, for example, instead of I kind of like to I liken this to the dog, where they're you're like, hey, Mittens, get up. Hey, Mittens, don't eat that. Hey, Mittens, you want to go for a walk? Then all of a sudden, ears perk up. They're ready to go. Yes, walk. So that's kind of we kind of do the same things as well. That, I'm playing video games, James, take out the trash. James, go do your homework. James, what do you want for dinner? Oh, I want In-N-Out. So that can be one of those poor listening habits. Another one is filling the gaps, manufacturing information that was not part of the original message. And this sort of message distortion can have serious consequences because you're creating information that wasn't there to begin with. Also, we have insulated listening, tuning out any topics that you would rather not deal with. This is, I liken this to the example of the passive aggressive roommate, where they do not hear a lot of the topic unless of the topic of how I should clean my dishes. Instead, they are focused on other things. So by tuning out information that I would not like to deal with, I don't have to deal with it. We also have defensive listening, which is taking innocent comments as personal attacks. This is those who get very defensive automatically, and this is a defense mechanism that if they automatically go on the defense, then they do not have to listen. Then their perspectives will never be challenged, which preserves their identity, but at the expense of having a more realistic identity that is conforming to reason and to reality. And then, last but certainly not least, we have ambushing, which is collecting information for the use of attacking a speaker later on. So I'm listening, I'm listening, I'm listening. Oh, Sue did poorly on the math test. Okay. Then afterwards, I then bring that up in a more embarrassing situation, and then that can cause so that I can cause Sue some psychological trauma. So that can absolutely, obviously, ruin a supportive communication climate. And I don't know if this happens a lot, but I hope that it doesn't. So now that we understand some of the challenges and some of the habits that we form that are poor listening habits, now we're going to be discussing the components of listening. There is the psychological aspect, the cognitive, and the behavioral. The physiological, the cognitive, and the behavioral. Physiological is the physical, cognitive is in the mind, behavioral is in the body. So, we start with hearing. Hearing is the physiological process, and it's diminished by physiological disorders or noise. That if dogs are barking out there, I'm going to have a harder time listening. I I am deaf, then that can also cause some challenges as well. So, along with that, uh, uh, so that is the physiological aspect. Now we move on to the cognitive, which is where we attend. This is the psychological process of selecting certain information. Yes, you could listen to me, or you could listen to the Netflix that you're playing on a TV screen next to you, or your phone that has just dinged and is ready to and for a text message. We tend to pay attention to messages that have an immediate payoff. Which one has an immediate payoff? Me giving you information right here, or the phone where you get to talk to your bro or your gal. I think that's the equivalent. Or watching Netflix about how Saul just did a super sick burn on his brother Chuck. So we have many different messages that we can attend to, and we tend to select ones that maybe have the most immediate payoff instead of the ones that may be more lasting. So you should attend to the verbal and nonverbal communication of the speaker, not just the verbal. We should give full attention, full selection of that person's communication. Next, we have understanding, and this is where there are several elements to attaching meaning to the message. Be aware of grammatical and syntactic rules of language that can diminish someone's understanding. Also, be familiar with the speaker's vocabulary and jargon, because if they do not understand the message, then if they do not understand the vocabulary or the jargon, they cannot understand the message. Also, keep in mind who's saying the message. There is an affective component that maybe I don't see my 2-year-old cousin as someone who I will gain any insight from by listening to them. So, as a result, I would not understand what they have to say, but maybe I might not be able to understand them anyway, since they are in fact two. But the context of the message also affects understanding, because if you are in a certain situation where you should be doing something, that may distort the message. If you are in a different relationship or a culture, all of which can distort and affect our understanding. The goal of this section, though, is listening fidelity, that exactly what one person intends to communicate is the thing that the other person receives. Now we've talked about the physiological and the cognitive components of listening. Now we're going to jump into the behavioral component of listening. And this involves remembering, recalling the information. A number of times the info is heard or repeated, that can help you remember better, and the amount of information is stored in the brain that can diminish remembering. That we can have information overload, and that can make it so that it is harder for us to remember specific details. So our ability to remember drops substantially over time, and that kind of speaks to this behavioral component of remembering, because it is a behavioral process of trying to remember. And then lastly, we have responding. And responding is one of those parts of the listening process that we do not usually think about to disastrous results. We should strive to give feedback, observable feedback, to the person presenting. This involves paraphrasing, repeating back what they've said in different words, or questioning, well, what did you mean by that? Also, nonverbal responses, things like nodding your head, making eye contact, things like that. I mean, there's using positive nonverbal responses show that you understand what they mean. And as I said, if this does not happen, this can lead to devastating results. When someone does not feel listened to, they have two options: fight or flight. They can either make you try to make you listen, or they can, well, they aren't going to listen to me anyway, so why am I going to bother? Both of which can diminish the relationship, and you might have been listening anyway, but you just didn't show it. So we have to be sure that we're giving that nonverbal responses. Paraphrasing and questioning are also very good means of responding. So that covers this first section. Next, we are going to be talking about the different types of listening responses.